It was a late afternoon like any other. She had spent the entire day at the hospital, caring for patients and dealing with the weight of decisions that only someone in the medical field would understand. Finally home, tired and wanting nothing more than a hot shower, she noticed something strange in the living room. A letter. Her name was written on the front, in the handwriting she knew so well, her husband's. Intrigued, she picked up the letter, never imagining that those words would change everything. As she opened the envelope and began to read, her heart began to beat faster. The first lines seemed surreal. "I'm leaving. I can't go on." With each word, a feeling of disbelief took hold of her. He, the man with whom she had shared so much, was leaving. And to make matters worse, that wasn't all. He was leaving her to live with another woman. The message was cold, direct, and cutting. "I'm grateful for the years together, but now I'm with someone I truly love," he said bluntly. She stopped reading, as if her mind refused to accept what was written. The letter trembled in her hands, and her eyes burned with tears that she tried in vain to hold back. Nothing on the paper explained what she had done wrong or what motivated such a cruel decision. Years of marriage, moments of joy, difficulties overcome together. Everything seemed now reduced to nothing, to a piece of paper. The pain began to transform into a mixture of confusion and anger. She picked up the phone and, without hesitation, dialed his number. Her heart raced, eager for an explanation, any word that could calm the turmoil in her mind. But the call would not go through. He had blocked her number. The realization that he had really left her was like an even stronger blow. The ground seemed to disappear beneath her feet. On impulse, she left the house. She needed answers, comfort, something that would help her understand what was happening. She drove almost automatically to her mother-in-law's house, whom she had always considered a second mother. When she arrived, she was greeted with surprise, and the woman's worried expression gave her a modicum of comfort. But when she handed the letter to her mother-in-law, she realized that even she didn't know what to say. This was just the first wave of a storm that she had no idea how she would weather. After a long silence, her mother-in-law began to read the letter, her expression a mix of shock and sadness. The woman read each word as if she were trying to absorb what was there, perhaps hoping that some detail could justify the inexplicable. When she finished, her eyes were also teary, but she tried to remain calm. She put the letter aside and, in a low voice, said, "I had no idea. John never said anything about being unhappy." Those words, which could have offered some comfort, only increased the confusion. Why had he never talked, never given any signs? Had she missed some detail over time, a clue hidden among the routines, the responsibilities of work, the small distractions of everyday life? Feeling even more disoriented, she sat on her mother-in-law's sofa, her body exhausted, but her mind racing. "Do you want me to try to talk to him?" her mother-in-law suggested with an expression of genuine concern. Deep down, she knew it was useless, but she nodded, clinging to any possibility of an explanation. Her mother-in-law picked up the phone, dialed, and waited. But the silence on the other end of the line lasted longer than any answer. After a few seconds, Juon's mother put the phone aside, defeated. The lack of an answer, the stonewalling, all of this made the situation even more distressing. She knew it wouldn't be easy to understand what was happening, but the rejection of a direct answer, of a face-to-face goodbye, made everything seem worse, as if her own past was being erased. Unable to bear the weight of the moment any longer, she decided to go home. The trip back was slow, with her thoughts revolving around whys. Memories flashed through her mind like flashes of old scenes. The wedding, the smiles, the promises of a life together. She couldn't understand how it could all end so coldly, with a simple letter. Every mile seemed to take a little more of her, and when she got home, reality hit her hard. The apartment that had once seemed cozy now felt empty, devoid of any warmth. The walls, which had witnessed moments of joy and laughter, now felt cold, echoing her loneliness. As she closed the door, she slid to the floor, unable to hold back her tears. She cried until there were no more tears, her heart heavy, her body exhausted. For hours, she remained there, surrounded by the shadows of what was left of her marriage. She tried to understand where it had all gone wrong, if there was anything she could have done to prevent this end. But there were no answers. Only silence, absence, and pain. She knew that from that moment on, her life would never be the same again. The next morning, she woke, up sitting on the floor, her face still damp from the tears from the night before. The sun timidly entered through the window, illuminating the emptiness around her. Every corner of the house seemed filled with memories that now seemed to cause her only pain. But even in the face of all this, there was a remnant of strength inside her, a need to get up and face reality. She took a deep breath, washed her face, and got ready to leave. As a doctor, she knew that her patients were counting on her, that the pain of others also needed attention and care, and that was something she could not ignore. She got dressed, trying to shield herself with the professional demeanor that always accompanied her, and left for the hospital. But something was different that day. As she entered the hospital corridors, she noticed curious and concerned looks from some colleagues. Normally, she was the picture of competence and serenity, but this time she could not hide the tiredness that she carried in her eyes. A nurse friend observed her for a moment and silently offered a small smile of support. But no one questioned her directly, as if they respected the space she clearly needed. As the day wore on, she tried to focus on her appointments and procedures. Caring for patients required a presence of mind that seemed to slip through her fingers. With each break between appointments, her mind kept returning to what had happened. She wondered repeatedly what she could have done differently, where she had gone wrong, how she had never noticed his distance before it was too late. Halfway through the shift, her nurse friend approached her again, this time with a hesitant look. "Have you checked Instagram today?" he asked, in a cautious tone. She frowned, confused. "No, I didn't have time for that." Without saying anything else, her friend held out her own phone and showed her the screen. There, on the small screen, was the image of her husband and his lover, embracing on a paradisiacal beach. He smiled, carefree, as if he were living the happiest moment of his life. The contrast between the lightness of that image and the pain she felt was devastating. A lump formed in her throat, and she struggled to maintain her composure. But tears began to well up, tracing paths down her tired face. She handed the phone back to her friend and, in a barely audible voice, murmured, "I need a moment alone." Without hesitation, her friend nodded and walked away, respecting her request. She walked out into the empty hallway and found a corner where she could break down without being seen. There, finally, she allowed herself to cry without reservations. All the memories, the years of dedication and love, the plans for the future, it all seemed like a cruel illusion. And now, looking at that photo, she knew there was no denying it. He had moved on without even looking back. The pain was overwhelming, and in that moment, she wondered if she would ever be able to heal. After some time alone, picking up the pieces of her dignity, she returned to work. She tried to focus on her tasks, on the patients who needed her, but inside, she felt like she was falling apart. Every smile she gave her patients was a mask for the deep pain that was consuming her. She knew that, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't ignore what was happening. The betrayal was still an open wound, and every memory of her husband was like salt on her bruised skin. When the day finally came to an end, she thought about simply going home and wallowing in silence. But a part of her wanted answers. She felt the need to understand what had driven her husband to act so coldly and cruelly without even a personal explanation. So she decided to confront him directly. Without warning, she drove to the address that she knew was his new home with his mistress. When she got there, the scene unnerved her. The house was beautiful, well kept, surrounded by details that made it clear that two happy people lived there. She took a deep breath and rang the doorbell, bracing herself for any answer. When the door finally opened, it was Sophia who appeared. For a moment, the two looked at each other, both surprised. Sophia, to see João's wife there, and she, to look at the woman who now occupied the place that had once been hers. Sophia hesitated for a moment but maintained her posture. "How can I help you?" she asked in a tone that mixed curiosity and a hint of disdain. She felt anger rising inside her, but she swallowed her pride. She didn't want Sophia to see how hurt she was. Instead, she simply said, "I need to talk to João." Sophia looked at her for a moment before answering. "He's not here. Maybe you should call him." The sharp and indifferent answer only reinforced the feeling of rejection that had accompanied her since discovering the betrayal. With no other option, she turned to leave, her heart even heavier. When she returned home, her anger mixed with sadness, forming a tangle of feelings that were difficult to process. Why had he chosen that woman? Was Sophia really more suitable, more interesting, or more loving? Every comparison she made her feel even smaller, as if the value of her own life was in question. Back in the empty apartment, she decided to try one last contact. She picked up her cell phone and, without waiting too long, sent a message to João, asking for a conversation. The hours dragged on, and she received no response. His silence was more painful than any words she could have said. The rejection continued, relentless. Sitting on the couch, she realized that she was tired of waiting for answers that might never come. That night, with her chest suffocating, she made a decision. She would try to heal herself. After all, even with all the pain, she still had something precious: her own dignity. The next morning brought a bitter lightness. She woke up determined to move forward, even without the answers she so desperately wanted. Each step was heavy, but she knew she had to start over. At the hospital, her colleagues noticed a change. Her eyes, although tired, seemed firmer, as if she had found new determination. She spent the day attending to patients with a calm demeanor, focused on each case. The pain was still there, but now it seemed to transform into something that strengthened her. During a break, she was surprised by her friendly nurse, who approached her, visibly concerned. "Paula, I know you're going through a difficult time, but there's something I think you should know." The nurse hesitated before continuing. "I heard from other colleagues that Sophia, João's new girlfriend, is pregnant." The news hit her like a blow. Pregnancy? He had never wanted to have children with her. For years he claimed that the timing was not right, that they were too busy, or that they still had a lot to achieve. It was her dream, something she had always cherished, and now the man who rejected her was about to become a father with another woman. The wave of pain and indignation returned with full force. She tried to hide it, thanked her friend for the warning, and walked away. But inside, the disappointment seemed endless. Everything she had ever dreamed of and desired, João was living with someone else. It was as if he had taken away not only her marriage, but also her plans, hopes, and dreams of building a family. In the days that followed, every time she thought about it, her chest tightened. But something changed inside her. Instead of letting herself be overcome by sadness, she began to channel this pain into strength. She decided that she would not allow this situation to define the course of her life. After all, she was more than a relationship that ended, more than the plans that did not come true. It was then that an unexpected opportunity arose. One of her patients, a woman she had always admired for her strength and resilience, mentioned a community aid project that needed someone with Paula's skills. She was excited about the idea. It would be something new, a project to which she could dedicate her time and energy, something that might help her overcome what she was going through. At the end of the day, as she walked to her car, she began to think about the next steps, about the possibilities that this project could open up for her. For the first time since the separation, she felt a slight hope rising in her heart. as if she could finally see a way out of that dark tunnel. Yes, it still hurt. The idea of João and Sofia expecting a child still hurt her deeply, but she realized that her life could have a new meaning, one that did not depend on him. The feeling that she could start over, that there was still purpose in her journey, was what helped her move forward that night. In the following days, Paula dedicated herself body and soul to the new community project. The proposal was simple but full of purpose: to provide medical care and support to low-income families. She immersed herself in the work, using her skills and knowledge to help those who needed it most, and this began to fill her in an unexpected way. Every smile and every word of gratitude from the patients seemed to ease the pain she carried in her chest a little more. One afternoon, while she was giving advice to a young mother about baby care, her cell phone vibrated. When she looked at the screen, she felt a mix of surprise and discomfort. It was a message from João. For a moment, she was paralyzed, not knowing if she should respond. After a few seconds, she took a deep breath and opened the message. He asked to meet her, saying he needed to talk about something important. A mix of anger and curiosity took over her. Why did he want to talk to her now, after so long? With her head in a mess, she decided that she would go find him. She needed an end to this story, and perhaps one last conversation could give her the closure she needed to move on. On the appointed day, Paula arrived at the cafe where they had agreed to meet. The place brought back memories of the beginning of their relationship, which made the situation even more difficult. When João arrived, she noticed that he looked tired, as if the last few months had left their mark on him too. He approached, sat down, and for a few seconds, the silence between them was thick. Finally, he broke the silence. "I know I hurt you in a way that may be impossible to repair," he began, looking directly into her eyes. "But I needed to see you to apologize. I'm sorry for everything I put you through." Paula kept her expression neutral, but inside, her heart was beating fast. It was hard to hear those words. The wounds were far from healed, but somehow, feeling his regret brought her an unexpected sense of relief. Still, she knew that apologies were not enough to erase the pain, the lost time, and the broken dreams. João continued, now with a more somber expression. "I also wanted to tell you something about Sofia and the baby." He hesitated, his gaze lost. "We've had some issues. She had a fall recently and had to undergo emergency surgery." Paula felt a chill run down her spine. Her medical instincts took over and she immediately asked, "Are she and the baby okay?" He nodded. "Yes, for now, but it's been a very difficult situation for us. I think it's made me realize a few things." Paula watched him silently, trying to process what he was saying. João seemed different, as if the recent events had forced him to rethink a lot of things. She didn't know exactly what she felt upon hearing all that, but she did know one thing. That was the last time she would let João's presence affect her emotions like that. She thanked him for his apology and wished him well. Deep down, she knew that that conversation had given her something she hadn't even expected: closure. From that moment on, she was truly ready to move on. After that conversation, Paula felt lighter, as if she had finally left behind a burden she had been carrying for months. The pain was still there, of course, but now it seemed easier to bear. She realized that her future no longer needed to be tied to João, that life could go on even after so much suffering. From that day on, Paula threw herself even more into the community project. That initiative became her refuge and a way to rediscover herself. On one of those afternoons at work, while finishing a consultation, she was approached by a fellow doctor with a sparkle in her eyes. "Paula, we need you in an emergency. A patient has just arrived in critical condition." Without thinking twice, Paula ran to the emergency room, where a team was preparing for a delicate surgery. When she finally saw who the patient was, she froze. It was Sofia. The shock paralyzed her for a moment. Sofia, the woman who had taken her place next to João, was there, vulnerable, in her hands. What brought her back to reality was the warning from one of the assistants. "Doctor, we need to start now." She knew what she had to do. Even with all the conflicting feelings, she remembered her oath as a doctor and the responsibility she had taken on to save lives, regardless of who the patient was. The surgery was intense and full of risks. Sophia's situation was delicate and required all of her skill and concentration. Every movement had to be precise, and Paula performed each procedure with a calmness that surprised even herself. During the surgery, she realized something fundamental. Her worth was not defined by what she had lost, but by what she was capable of doing. There, she found her strength again, and that strength did not depend on anyone but her. After hours of work, the surgery finally came to an end and Sophia was stable. Paula left the room exhausted, but with a sense of duty accomplished. As she removed the equipment, her colleagues approached her to congratulate her. They knew the history between her and João. They knew the suffering she had gone through, and they were impressed by the ethics and professionalism she demonstrated. Paula smiled, accepting the compliments, but in her heart, she knew that the true appreciation lay within herself. As she left the operating room, she allowed herself a moment alone. The weight of that situation was still there, but she felt a lightness she had never felt before. She realized that by saving Sophia, she was also saving a part of herself, the part that believed in her own dignity, her worth, her ability to rise above the pain. Later, she received a visit from João. He entered the room with an apprehensive expression, not sure what to say. "Thank you for everything you did for Sophia and the baby," he murmured, seeming genuinely grateful. Paula looked at him calmly and simply nodded. At that moment, she knew that her path was different, and that her life no longer depended on his approval. For her, that thank you was the last chapter of a story that had long needed to end. In the days that followed, Paula felt an inner peace that she had not experienced in a long time. Rediscovering her strength and purpose brought her a clarity that had previously seemed impossible. Every morning when she woke up, she felt a silent gratitude for the life she was rebuilding, even with the scars of the past. The feeling that she had overcome something so painful made her more confident and determined. One day, while walking through the hospital after a shift, one of the directors of the institution approached her. "Paula, I wanted to talk to you about a special proposal," he began with a friendly smile. Curious, she followed him to the meeting room, where he explained the idea of expanding the community project. "We need someone to lead this new phase, and honestly, I can't think of a better person than you." The proposal was challenging and at the same time, extremely rewarding. She would be responsible for coordinating the entire team, organizing training sessions and seeking partnerships. It would be an opportunity to dedicate herself even more to what had become her passion, and at the same time, make an even bigger difference in people's lives. Without hesitation, Paula accepted. She felt that it was exactly what she needed at that moment to rewrite her story. Little by little, the project gained momentum. With her support, the team was expanded and the scope of the services expanded. Now they served families in several underprivileged regions, offering everything from basic consultations to specialized treatments. Paula saw each achievement as a step towards her own healing process. Helping other people face their difficulties made her realize that suffering, when overcome, could be transformed into something valuable and powerful. During one of these project activities, Paula was called to see a child who needed an urgent consultation. There, she met a volunteer named Helena, a woman with a sincere smile and compassionate gaze. The two began talking about the work they were doing, and Helena soon became a close friend, someone Paula found support in and with whom she shared her own experiences of overcoming obstacles. As time went by, Paula realized that through her new friendships and the impact she was making on the community, she was rebuilding bonds and creating a life that did not depend on anyone else to be complete. The strength she had found within herself multiplied every day, and instead of looking back with bitterness, she now looked forward with hope. One afternoon, while organizing some materials for the project, Paula received an unexpected message. It was from Axel, a German doctor she had met at a conference years ago. He was passing through the country and wanted to know if they could meet for a chat. Smiling, Paula accepted the invitation. She knew she had learned a lot about herself and that, regardless of what the future held, she was ready to live new experiences. At that moment, as she put her cell phone in her pocket and continued her work, Paula realized that she had finally closed the cycle of her pain. She was free to move on, stronger and more serene than she had ever imagined. That afternoon, Paula prepared to meet Axel with a calm that was the result of her new phase. Arriving at the cafe where they had arranged to meet, she saw him at a table near the window. He welcomed her with a warm smile, and the conversation began lightly, full of laughter and stories of his journeys in the world of medicine. Axel was different from anyone she had ever met. His perspective on life, marked by experiences around the world, and his compassion for his patients, fascinated her. They talked about everything, from the challenges of the profession to the small details of everyday life that made them smile. The lightness of that encounter brought a sense of well-being that Paula had not experienced in a long time. After a few hours, Axel looked at her seriously. "Paula, I see a strength in you that I rarely find in people. It's like you've been through something very deep and painful, but at the same time, it's made you even more incredible." Paula was silent for a moment, touched by those words. It wasn't common for someone to see her healing process and the journey that brought her to this point so clearly. She shared a bit of her story with him honestly, without being afraid to expose her wounds. She talked about the end of her marriage, about betrayal, and about how, at the most difficult time in her life, she found strength in herself and in community work. Axel listened attentively, without judgment, and when she finished, he simply held her hand in a silent gesture of support. At that moment, Paula realized that she was finally making room in her heart for something new. She didn't know if that encounter with Axel would lead to a new relationship, or if it would just be a valuable friendship, but that didn't matter. What really mattered was the fact that, after so much pain, she felt a lightness, an ability to believe in something good again. In the days that followed, Axel continued to be in her life in a discreet but present way. They met whenever he was in town, sharing moments that strengthened their friendship and created memories. Paula felt that she was rebuilding her heart little by little without rushing, and each encounter with Axel was like a brick in this new phase of her life. As her project at the hospital continued to grow, she and Axel decided to join forces to further expand the scope of their services. With his international experience, he brought new ideas, and together, they created campaigns and events that attracted more volunteers and donations. Paula felt that she was experiencing something genuine with purpose, and that this gave her a peace she never imagined possible. She finally realized that love, respect, and true friendship did not need to be sought in places where there was no reciprocity. Everything she was building now, every bond and every smile, was her choice, a part of her new path. Months passed, and Paula's community project gained national prominence. Her work was transforming lives, and she finally felt that all the suffering had led to a greater purpose. Axel became a great friend and ally, and the two cultivated a deep and sincere relationship where respect and mutual support were the basis of everything. Then, at a gala evening organized by the hospital to honor the professionals who stood out the most in community work, Paula was called to the stage to receive an award. As she went up, amid applause, she felt that everything she had been through had led her to this moment. When she took the microphone, she looked at the audience and, with a sincere smile, thanked them. "This award is not just mine. It belongs to every life I have touched, every pain I have overcome, and every person who believed in me, even when I almost stopped believing." Applause echoed, and among it, she spotted Axel, smiling and clapping proudly. Paula felt her heart warmed by the friendship and support he had given her since they had met again. After the event, Axel invited her for a walk. The two of them walked through the hospital garden, illuminated by the soft light of the streetlights. the perfect setting for what he had in mind. At one point, he stopped and looked into her eyes. "Paula, you know how much I admire your strength, your generosity, and your spirit. But there is something I need to tell you, something I have carried with me since the moment I met you again." Paula, curious and surprised, encouraged him to continue. Axel took a deep breath and said, "Paula, my mother was a patient of yours." He paused, seeing her expression of surprise. "Yes, a few years ago you operated on her in a very delicate situation. The treatment and care you gave her were not only professional, they were humane, profound, full of compassion. You had no idea who she was, but you cared for her as if she were your own family." Paula vaguely remembered a patient who had gone through complications, but she had never known that she was Axel's mother. He continued, "After she recovered, she told me something I will never forget. Find a woman with the same courage and kindness as that doctor, and you will know what happiness is. That's why, when I saw you again, I knew I had found that person. I needed to get closer to you. I needed to really get to know you." Paula was moved, touched by the depth of that revelation. That moment was not just a meeting of fates, but proof that, even without knowing it, her work, her essence, had touched lives in ways she never imagined. With tears in her eyes, she approached Axel and, in a silent embrace, thanked life for all the path that had brought her there. From that night on, Paula and Axel began a new chapter, one she never imagined she would live. It was a love built on respect, gratitude, and true admiration. And with him by her side, Paula finally felt whole, knowing that true love, as well as her purpose, had found its way back into her heart. She knew that all the suffering of the past had been worth it. After all, it had led her to someone who saw her for who she truly was and who valued her not for what she had suffered, but for who she had become.